But
Are you feeling okay? You just tired? Just waking up?
yeah, I was just waking up. I wasn't feeling so good yesterday, so
Mm.
I didn't really do much yesterday. I had lots planned, but I ended up just saying, "Oh, I just
Yeah.
feel exhausted," and I went to bed. I think for an hour or two in the afternoon. I felt a little bit better after that, but I had a good night's sleep, so
Yeah,
hopefully
good.
I'm fine now.
No other real symptoms other than kind of the a little bit off and
Yeah,
yeah.
just a little bit off. Friday was ended up being a reasonably big day. Um, I was invited onto a 2 hour uh, exploratory call by the Liberal Democratic Party
Mm.
policy team. I was
Hmm.
invited to come in on a group call about health and what might the party think about as possible policies as they put together their general election program for next year, which was an interesting conversation. Um, and then Paul had arranged a bit of a big do. It was I've been encouraging for him some time to put some more structure around what he's trying to do with the enlightened enterprise and start thinking about proper funding and building things, because he's largely a one and a half man show because I'm helping him out a lot, but he's got so many contacts and so many things he wants to do, and he can't do them all by himself. And some of the things are suffering through lack of capacity. And part of it is he's scared to let go. So he
Hmm.
grabs it close, and then of course he hasn't got the bandwidth to deliver.
Hmm.
So I've been at him for some time that we need to do something more. So he finally agreed to do that. He had some fairly high-powered guy who he'd helped, the guy whose book he published last year is an ex-director of Nortel and DuPont and places like that. So super well connected. So he was over for a week. We had a couple of sessions, and then Friday was like a gathering of a broader team of people that Paul's managed to assemble to hash through what could this enlightened enterprise thing be, what would be the story of the kernel of what it's trying to articulate and position as it's pitched to the world, and what form could it take if we were to set it up and get it up and running. And Paul was becoming increasingly aware that he perhaps didn't have such a coherent story of what enlightened enterprise was. He's written loads and loads of articles. It's almost like he's written too much that he couldn't see the wood for the trees when it comes to a condensation process. So 10:30 on Thursday night, he says, I've just put together an agenda. I wonder if you could do an hour's presentation on the experiences you've gained from your work in health and these conferences to give a sort of sense of what some of the contours of enlightenment might look like. So I was like, fucking hell, why are you doing this at 10:30 on a Thursday when it's on Friday? So anyway, so I gave that presentation. There was about 10 people in the room and several people from the US and Canada on the screen in the boardroom of a big London legal firm whose partner that Paul's managed to bring in on this. So I felt quite a lot under pressure to distill the wisdom of my forays into health, and I mean, it seemed to go well. So anyway, so that was good. But and then I was pretty exhausted, and I thought, I'll go to the gym. I was like, but I think by the time I woke up on Saturday, I'd like completely worn myself out. So I think that was just yesterday was probably the overhang from Friday.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, how would you say the thing went overall that Paul pulled together? Your presentation included in that, but the whole sense of uh, did it frustrate, titillate, resolve more than that, all of that?
I think it titillated. It's probably of the words that you offered. Because I think a lot of people sort of sensed into the stuff that Paul's been doing something of something important and profound. But as Paul talks about shards and pieces of this, it was a feeling of something, but that hadn't really been sort of condensed into and distilled into what it might be as a thing. It was just like lots of ideas pointing in a direction that everyone feels is a direction we should be heading into. But what is this? What is the distillation of this thing? And he's been referring a lot to it as enlightened enterprise. And he started introducing the need for a new enlightenment as a kind of philosophical framework around which an enlightened enterprise would sit, and that enlightenment is less about rationality and breaking things down into bits and reassembling them in a sort of objective world. It needs to be something that incorporates and instantiates human flourishing as its core center. So, you know, it's the thing we've been talking about. How do you bridge the humanities and the sciences? How do you bring that together into a story of human and planetary flourishing that aligns enterprise around the well-being of the commons? That's, I suppose, another way of putting it. So and I think because he's called it enterprise, a lot of people around the table were thinking, well, are we talking about a more, you know, with ESG hanging in the air, is this a more of a nobler organization? Is that what we're talking about? You know, one that's perhaps a little bit more purposeful, with purpose leading the way and profit in its wake, rather than profit focused and purpose sort of painted on the side as a bit of makeup to make it look like we can just make profit without anyone criticizing us too much. And what I did, if we truly care about this stuff, organizations and enterprises sit within a broader context. They sit within an environment, whether it's a financial environment, whether it's an industry context, sat within a political frame that is looking to shepherd or point or steer, you know, whether it's you're in the energy or the transportation business or the education or the health or the energy. There is a story that sits around that represents the frame, that encourages a set of actors to attend to things in a particular way, that then sets the context for the individual enterprise to turn up and do its bit. So if we really want to bring around change at scale, it's this sort of game of chess at 4 levels thing that I've talked to you about before. So I laid out that in my work in health, just changing a way of an individual hospital or a pharma company thinks, as important as that is, if it's in a context that expects those organizations to snap into a wider model that has a set of logics embedded in it, then there's antibodies in the environment to the very change we wish to see. So we've got to think about the entire environment. And I don't think any of them in the room had kind of thought about enlightened enterprise expressed in this much bigger structural way. So this was my pitch to say, look, if we're going to take this seriously, as important as it is for individual organizations, we have to think about the broader sector that they sit in and the story that sits around that. So that went down really well. And they were like, oh my God, yeah. So we're talking about like the narratives for policymakers and industry sectors as well as organizations. And so if we are to set up as an enlightened enterprise, and then there's a bigger story to tell about enlightenment in the business sector than just trying to pick off one organization at a time. So I said, no, if the scale of the ambition is to transform game A to game B, we going around picking one off organization off at a time, given the scale of the problems and the need to change and the time frames in which the whole game will start to unwind because we're destroying the substrate we're based on and destabilizing the political order. We need to be thinking about it in these terms. And then they were going, oh yeah. So if we were able to be successful with one or two firms, key firms in a sector, that can change the conversation in the sector. We could set some dominoes falling. So we got talking about exploring the contours of how to get entire sectors to transform themselves in more enlightened ways. So out of it came a sort of general excitement that this perhaps was a bigger story than they perhaps imagined, and that there was something of a narrative framework around that they could see the logic of, and that this could be something bigger. So Paul's task now is to kind of write that up and constitute that into a kernel of what could be born, the seed, if you like. And it was like pointed to what the oak tree could be, but we need to create the seed and plant it in some environment and begin that journey. So where would we start and how would we build and what would it look like? So there's a little bit of like, is this a not-for-profit or isn't it? I think the advantage of having Elliot Schreiber, this sort of guy who'd written the book and been on the board, is that he brought some gravitas to it. Like, I've run big organizations before and sat on the boards who've considered some of these issues. So it was like, how would an organization board respond to these kind of provocations? Would you speak to the CEO? Would you speak to what kind of fears exist when you encounter something that seems alien and threatening? Because change always does. There's a sort of group think and a group mentality, and we've always done it like this kind of security. So I talked to them about reciprocal narrowing and reciprocal opening as a kind of frame around what they attend to, and therefore there's a sort of hermetically sealed thought container that Game A organizations would normally find themselves constrained within in terms of seeing what's relevant, and what we're doing is challenging that frame and how might we do this. And so anyway, Paul messaged me on Friday night with some very positive messages he got back from delegates who participated in it. He shared some of those. I think personally, although I've been supporting Paul a lot, he's quite enamored by big fish, like when he speaks to these people. And I talked to him a lot about some of my ideas, and I think some of them sort of start to go blah blah blah. It's like Andy's off on one of his things again, right?
Yeah.
And he speaks to all these people and he's got all these ideas, but these guys I'm talking to, they got their finger on the pulse. They know what they're the big cheeses that are players in this world. So I think him inviting me to present, me outlining my ideas, and then him seeing the reaction in the room has gotten.
The image that comes to mind, I have to share with you. It's based on an amalgam of old 1940s, 50s cartoons that I see, the old style Saturday morning cartoons before Mickey Mouse and so forth. But Paul attempting to orchestrate and conduct all of these big wigs, and they seem serious and all of this, and meanwhile Andy's over on the side, a worm. Humor me on a hook, kind of adjusting his hair. Oh, you boys. Gong. And here come the titillation of something you're saying is of massive interest. And Andy's like, what is it that you have that's so alluring I hear you, and it starts to sound like blah, blah, blah. They hear you and they're like, whoa, this is fascinating. Where have you been keeping this guy? Right.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that in the room, and I think so. I'm interested. I think this might shift a little bit Paul's sense of the value that I could bring to what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know his heart's in the right place, but he's off on like a million things, and I this attempt to condense things into what exactly are we talking about, and what's the new story, and what are the contours of that. I was the only one in the room who gave an expression to that,
Mm-hmm.
and people were like, "Oh my god!"
Yeah.
So
I want
that's
to
what we're talking about.
I want to give a little bit of a reflection on what I heard you name, and bring to the fore that they got, from the perspective that I see it, and kind of what I've been looking at with Kylie, which is, um, what I've been doing a lot of is paying attention to the way that we use words, and the way that our words have lost a lot of their potency because we use them in a weird sort of a way.
Mm,
So in particular, noticing, this is braiding sweetgrass. If you've ever read that, the indigenous cultures often have language which are 90 or 60%, 2/3 verbs and 1/3 nouns. English is something that is 2/3 nouns and 1/3 verbs. Thereabouts. We nounify everything. So when you say enlightened enterprise, what does my brain do? There are two, there's an adjective and a noun. Or is it an adverb and a verb, right? Enterprise clearly was a verb, right? It is, and so looking up the etymology of what enterprise means, it basically means a doing together, right? It's a doing between, right? And it brings to mind that so much of what we do is a doing between. As
mm,
it nounifies, it starts to get objective in this way that it looks like it's self-contained. It knows what it's doing. And at that point, everything else is just fuel to feed this thing. It's no longer doing with or between. It is just a turning in it. It's a meat grinder, right?
yeah, yeah. No, exactly.
And so there's something about reawakening. The enlightened enterprise is something that does that. Again, hyperpotentiated for metaphors this morning, getting the coffee going. So if I get too deep into them, let me know. But enlightened also is an interesting one, right? Because
Mm,
the thing that Kylie and I have explored a lot of is, and we've talked about a lot as well, but it's this sense of how much searching people do under the existing light posts. Keys aren't there. That's not where I lost them. Why are we looking there? Because that's where the light is the brightest. Okay. Another light metaphor here. Let there be light. Ah, what is that? We're creating a new context in which our activity is the thing that produces the light that lets us see what's here. It's different from searching for the thing that I know I lost. It's actually bringing forth your gifts, bringing forth my gifts, such that light is generated. And suddenly we see things, we see features of the landscape that, in a sense, we grow the capacity to see the landscape freshly and newly. And if there are keys there, the ones we lost are the ones we have never yet found, they will come into relief. And this landscaping thing that we're doing, this sense of the map and the territory as objects has the same problem as this enterprise. This mapping and this territorying, if we can do that as an enterprising together, you and I mapping and territorying at the same time, the territory comes alive. The mapping is the exploration and discovery and dancing. The 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 way that I named this as something that was part of the
mm,
quality existence, the what's her name, the one who likes Paul Vanderklay and John Vervaeke. She talks about Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance. Anyway, it'll come to me later. She kind of came out of the woodwork, been doing stuff kind of behind the scenes anyway for a long time. Mostly was just very subdued, not really so much in the ways of interviews, but a few. But she was talking about this sense of after watching a conversation between Ian McGilchrist and DC Schindler. She started off, the conversation was started off with the sense of, if God is a prime mover, in what way did God move? And I've shared this before, that not like a cue stick on a billiard ball, right? Mm-hmm. That's not what the movement was. It wasn't this extrinsic impulse from the outside to change the inertia from bumping it like that. It was a call as a poem to the intrinsic nature. This is the why it's so compelling to look at. If what I'm doing as an enterprise is bumping billiard balls, trying to get them to go in pockets, then what's this like yoo-hoo, where the balls go themselves into the pockets without any external forcing, right? That's a very different kind of a thing. And yes, there's a tricky aspect of that. This yoo-hoo can be used to exploit. Give me all of your riches. Thank you very much. The pockets are mine. You're out of the game. Wait a minute. That's not what we want. But if it's your pockets, my pockets, your balls, my balls, we're territorying and mapping at the same time, suddenly the balls do assemble themselves and go into the pockets, and we reap the benefit of that and are able to do it again. Beautiful, yeah. Right?
Have you heard Forrest Landry talking about his mapping? Because he loves his triads.
Is it one of the recent ones that we had with Roger, or is it older than that? Is it something in one of the two links that we've had in the discussion group recently? I haven't, so I don't know which one. Yeah.
I mean, he likes his sort of triads.
Yeah.
So his one with regards to maps is you need three things: a map, a location, and a compass. So it's great to have a map, but if you don't know where you are on it, then that's a problem. It's like you see the objective view, but you don't really know where I am or we are in this. So you need a map to help you see where to go. So the map is obviously the outline of the territory. The location is, where am I in this map, or where are we in this map? And the compass is, where are we trying to, how do we orient ourselves in this map? Because we could go anywhere, and not all destinations are ones worth going to. Some are. How do we know which one's going? But the location is really important as well, because he used the analogy that if you want to go in that, if the good is in that direction, and you come to the edge of a cliff, you can't go straight towards the good, or you fall off. So you're going to have to navigate through the territory in ways that recognize the reality of your context, but be aware of where the orientation, where you're trying to get to. So, I mean, he says it much more eloquently than I'm trying to do at this time in the morning. But
beautiful. No, it's good.
Where are we trying to get to? Where is the good? Mm-hmm. What is the territory that we have to contend with, and where am I on that? So I know how to navigate in the reality of the territory I am, with a sense of where the good is. And that if we don't have those three dancing together, then it's easy to get lost, or not know where you are, or come across a barrier and not know what to do with it. The call from beyond helps us to then contend with whatever's in front of us and help to navigate around it towards the good.
I want to bring something in here. This is a beautiful little image that I think it perfectly fits here. That's nice, right? Which is imagine the pebble at the top of the mountain that knows it wants to see the sea, right?
Hmm.
And so it kind of knows where the sea is. It can see it, and as it starts to roll down the river, it's like it's like I don't have the momentum that I have myself, but perhaps if I can find the right thing, in some sense, a cliff for it is a good thing, right? But it still kind of gets stuck in another pile of pebbles, and it can't get moving and stuff. And so calling forth a flood of the rainstorm that whoosh, washes it downstream a little bit more. Now it can get into an interesting place where it kind of gets into a crevice, a corner, something which it can't get around. It sort of knows the directionality that gravity is pulling it, and the sea was down there, but I can't get down there. And so in some sense, this corner is provided a dilemma, right? I can't go this way, I can't go that way. It's everything, every way appears to be blocked. I want to share that there's something of this, which is the feeling of being cornered, right?
Yes.
Someone I've said recently, if you feel like you're painted into a corner, you don't truly understand the full nature of corners, right? And Manuel said, Kylie's husband said, you obviously haven't heard of up. Well, so it's an interesting thing, right? Because the pebble may not know a way to go up, but if there's a thing of if it's just no, I know down, the directionality is down, and that's where I want to get, and I'm blocked, but just keep pressing here, nothing's ever going to happen, maybe accidentally. But if I'm looking for the opportunities where I can get around this blockage, I can that I know down is where I want to go. I can't. So in what way can I discover an affordance that will get me around? I need to discover aroundness as a pebble. I don't know. And maybe a flood does it as well, right? This is an interesting aspect of a new thing, or a bird or whatever, right? But the thing of getting cornered and being frustrated because I can't quite get myself out of the corner. Of course, you can't get yourself out of the corner. You're going to have to invite some elements to help you with the flow. So just that notion of that goal and how the manifesting of different aspects of this that bring illumination to pathways that are countergrade to the gross movement, but necessary for the micro.
Yeah. And it may even be necessary to retrace your steps to go backwards in order to find another way to go forwards. Yeah.
Yes.
But in a contending with people may actually be conceding at some points. Maybe I have made the mistake. Maybe you're right, and I'll come with you a bit, and then you're not wholly right, but you're right enough that maybe in this point I should go with what you're saying and then find another way around. But the up bit is something. There you throw that in. It's something I've found that worked quite well for me. It's sort of an instinct that I developed, but I could perhaps put a bit more of a philosophical frame on it now that I've read more and understand what I was doing, which was when you find yourself in that kind of contention. And I was using this as an example in the talk I was giving on Friday of how the language of pharma and the language of healthcare, it's like trying to mix oil and water, and therefore this partnership thinking that just doesn't work because we need we need to sell more stuff and hit the quarterly numbers. We're here to care for people, and that's trying to find, well, what does partnership mean when you're speaking Chinese and Quechuan or something? It's difficult, but if you were to rise above and say, go up a level, we're both here to improve health. You have some pieces that manifest in certain ways. We have some stuff that we do, but together we're all part of the same enterprise. But because we've collapsed into the language of what we do in the trenches every day, we can't see that coupling. There isn't, the hooks don't attach. But if we were to rise up and see we're part of a joint enterprise, then it reveals to us new forms in which we could come together to make that possible. It's the Hegelian synthesis. And I found that even leaving aside healthcare, just when I'm in a sticky corner with someone and they're arguing their point of view, and I've been sort of coming at it a point of view in the discussion to rise up one level above, like what is the story that unites us? Because we both care about something. It's again the Hegelian synthesis. So often going up rather than going through can harness the opposition into a new synthesis that then allows you to proceed, but with greater strength, because you brought others along around a higher order articulation of the joint thing that we both care about.
Mm-hmm.
And it arose, I think, because I remember right from the very get-go, I had this sudden awareness when I was working at the bottom of the pile when I took my first job ever, when my band collapsed and I was doing some shitty job at British Telecom, carrying memos around and doing stuff at the photocopier and doing errand boy stuff. I was always looking at my boss. I think I mentioned to you, what would my boss do? Because I was watching my boss get all these things land on his or her lap. And I was like, how would I deal with that? And I would just observe. I was like, okay. That's why he or she did it. Okay. So I started to build a picture of what the higher order model, of which I was an agent in, the arena that I was playing in, what's going on in the arena. So although I'm an agent in that arena, I'm starting to build a picture of how the arena works. So if I've got a problem or I've got an issue, then I can use that arenic perspective to help my boss solve this problem, rather than just, he said that or she said that, and we get stuck at this lower level butting of heads. I could use the problem I discovered, use the arenic orientation or perspective to see how I might solve that in ways that my boss would find agreeable and useful for the arena. And that way of thinking, what would my boss do? What would my boss do? How are they seeing it? It's something, as I was going up the ladder, that I was always doing. So each time I got a promotion, I'd done a lot of the thinking already about what that role would mean, and I was on to the next game, which I think, looking back, helped. I started off as a clerical assistant.
Yeah.
And 10 years later, I was running the division.
Yeah. It's that classic story. You look at someone who knows the internal workings and the motivations of the organization, and from the top to the bottom can provide the context and the vision for what the whole organization is doing, what this enterprising is about.
Yeah. Rather than what tasking is about within the enterprise.
Right. So it's interesting because there is a kind of way currently that Kylie's pointed out the fact that currently there is a dearth. Dearth is much or less?
Less.
There's
a lack of something.
Yeah. There's a dearth of tasking, right? No one has as much energy for tasking as we used to. Everyone is stuck in a corner. We've lost what it is, so we're no longer doing the enterprising. The tasking is, in a sense, reached maximum entropy, right? We're all stuck in our corners, and so deeply stuck in our corners that it requires some degree of backtracking. Where did we get lost to pull this blob out of its massive corner, right, into a new flow, right? And that happens, right? One way that would happen is an avalanche, right? It's an interesting kind of a notion, because we talked about this before. Where does the energy in an avalanche come from? Well, it builds up over time, but you can't see it because it looks static, right? This potential of snowflake by snowflake by snowflake. And what? It's not doing anything, right? A snowflake can't budge anything, but clustered together in these stacks and layers on a hillside, where it gets to the point where just this tiny little yoo-hoo rubble, and and all that is moved, that flow, indiscriminate of the frailties of any of the things being moved, right? It's going downhill all in a tumble, right? And similarly with a glacier, right? A glacier is this drops of water frozen and moving with a bit of gravity and shove to carve canyons, right? So it's an interesting kind of a way that this stuckness that we're in, the tasking is what is. I have to watch myself. My metaphors become untethered from the territory that I'm trying to describe, and it's like, now I'm just in the reverie of it. But the tasking, as there's no energy for tasking anymore, is kind of a fascinating thing. What is it going on there when that's true? And I want to explore something and then hand it over. Mine's solid enough that I can do it after you. So if you got something pregnant, go ahead.
One of the conversations that's very much alive in leadership and business and what's going on is this story of purpose, and because if we have so many silos and people are tasking away in their silos and they become disenchanted with that, then levels of employee engagement are low. People become defensive about their tasking, and politics starts to build, and there's sort of a kind of ossification of the organization with its internal antibodies against itself. It can be quite tricky navigating or getting large organizations to work. So this notion of, is there a common purpose that transcends my tasking but points the way to what I'm here to? My task has a transcendent meaning because it contributes to something bigger that I can see and that I can care about, and therefore I'm not just narrowly focused on the task. I can see that I'm part of something bigger, and that part of something bigger is something meaningful, and I can participate my piece and see how it fits into the bigger whole. And of course, the most classic, corny exemplar of that is JFK going to NASA and asking the janitor, "What do you do?" And they said, "I help put a man on the moon." It's like suddenly sweeping the floors is not longer a task of sweeping the floors. It's part of an enterprise of putting a man on the moon, and I'm honored to play my piece in it, and I can see that there's a transcendent meaning to what I'm doing. So I think there's something of that story that's missing in a lot of contexts that could help take tasking and see it as part of something transcendent.
Yeah, I'm increasing quarterly returns so that Jeff Bezos can buy a bigger boat and tear down more bridges.
Yes.
What? Is that what I'm doing?
Exactly. Well, I think people are becoming more aware, and maybe it is the explosion of information, that whether it was TV, cable TV, internet, we suddenly see more of the world, that we're not, our view of the world isn't constrained to the material presencing of stuff of me located in this particular place at this particular moment of time. And therefore, when I go to work, I'm contributing to this mythos that I can't really see, but it kind of feels important because it's bigger than the world that I can presence in my everyday life. Now we see the bigger world, we see all the things going on, and therefore the thing that I work for doesn't have the magisterial, I'm not walking into the cathedral anymore, I'm walking into this organization that does shit, and I'm a task monkey. And so my conceptualization of the context of my tasking is reframed.
Yeah.
And therefore this thing doesn't feel like a cathedral anymore. It feels more like a prison camp I'm walking into to do my shit. And then I get...
There's no more extraction to be extracted, right?
Yeah, I don't want to be extracted. I can look around and see all the shit going on, and I don't want to be participating in a thing that's contributing to the extraction of me and the extraction of the world. Unless there's something that inspires me in this, I don't want to waste or spunk my life force up the wall in this shitty place.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So beautiful. This is laying wonderful mapping territorying together to explore the thing of it. I got to a pretty transcendent view of what it is, the bigger enterprise of what we're doing. That gives me a perspective. But I want to go back to this idea of there's no energy for tasking anymore. Because something, when I was talking to Manuel about that Manuel's working on a project, neurability, right? It's an interesting one. Neurodivergence the diversity of neurodivergence is a necessary resource for enterprising, but most people see it as something to be tolerated. Just plug them in over there, get them to bag groceries. No, hold on. This is a precious resource. And one of the things, it was interesting because Emmanuel is profoundly neurodivergent in a way that can make it extremely troubling to figure out exactly what's being said or what's being done, but he knows himself very deeply. And partly, I think, in being Portuguese is interesting. There's several factors that give contribution to this, but he was talking about last night as we were in a reverie about computers and the computer history, computer lore, and all of this stuff. We talked about our first computers, and he got, worked his way up to wanting to be able to buy a particular computer. I don't remember the brand. You wouldn't have heard of it. It's not something that anyone knew about, because shortly after he bought it, plunking down, getting his father to spend like $2,500 on this machine that was supposed to do all kinds of wonderful things, the company went out of business. It didn't have any real software to it. It had a basic interpreter as its core, and he had the serial number of the chipset that was there. So that's what Manuel had. And his father looked at him and said, "Well, boy, it looks like you bought yourself a pretty expensive paperweight. I suggest you figure out how to make it useful." And so Manuel did. He went and figure out this and write something. He wrote a little text editor, something better than Notepad, not quite as good as WordPad, but okay, this is good. Wrote something that kind of acted, if you squinted at it, looked kind of like a spreadsheet kind of a thing. It wasn't a spreadsheet, but it was doing some of the jobs that a spreadsheet's doing. Before such a time as VisiCalc or Lotus 123 existed, he built a series of tools that was useful for him. And it's like, can I turn this paperweight into something that can actually do something? And as it was going through it, there was a user group that was trying to figure out as well. Other people had bought this machine and trying to figure out what to do with it. And Manuel got an invitation to talk to the CEO, one of the people who had been in the company, and show him what he's done. And the man looked at him and was like, "Wow, you've actually made this machine usable. Would you mind selling me the software that you built? I'll pay you this much money for it." And it was like 1/20th of the cost of the machine. So a substantial amount, but not overly much. And it was like, wow, for this effort, this thing that I've done that's just my own little playing, somebody's willing to pay me, $150 or whatever. But he sold 40 copies of it through the network. It was just like, boom, yes, everybody wants this because it increases the utility of the machine itself. So why did I go down the path of this? It's the sense of the neurability, right? This capacity that there's something that Manuel can do that is a very specific kind of a thing that is useful for everyone, but no one would know how to ask him to do the things that he did. Him making it useful for his purposes turned out to be useful for other people. But if it's just extracted, make the device do this thing. Okay, it's funny. I don't know why you wanted to do that. I can make it do that. It would really be interesting if it did this other thing over here. No, don't do that. Just do this. Right? Which is kind of what we start to do. That extractive thing starts to do kind of like the building of the potential for an avalanche or something. But if the avalanche is only this catastrophic collapse that moves things along, rather than using the energy of it in between, let some of the snowflakes explore, do some other things. Okay. I want to look at what we came to prior to that story as an illustrative of a deeper principle that he and I discovered, which is In my own thing, there are certain relationships. I hate the word chore, like with a passion. It really irks me a lot. And I notice it's not the activity that is detestable, it's the frame of the activity. It's taking something that I would do out of an act of love and turning it into an obligation. And I detest that. If you can avoid putting it in the frame of an obligation, I'm happy to give it. If you're going to make it into something that I must do, I'm going to drag my feet and figure out if there's something else I could do. I'm likely to spend my time instead staring out the window, doing nothing at all, than do the thing that you set me as an obligation. Manuel named that as a characteristic. He pays a lot of attention to DSM and within neurodivergence community. He was working with a large community of people on Reddit for a while. That has a name. You may know it, and this is in the medical community. I didn't know it. Pathological demand avoidance. Now, it's interesting because he said it's subclinical. This is a subclinical diagnosis of something that's happening. And Manuel says, subclinical, my ass, look around. You can't quite tell by looking at a single individual, but you can tell by looking at a population. It is subclinical. Why is there such a problem with engagement within the enterprise? Overtaxing to the point of massive collective expression, emergent expression of a deeper aspect of pathological demand avoidance. What is that? That's not the lack of capacity. It's not a laziness. It's not a lack of ability or skill. It's a context problem. It is trying to turn something that is a passion, a gift, a love, an act of love into an obligation, a debt, something that you must pay off. And as such, at some tipping point, I don't care how much you pay me. I ain't going to do it.
Interesting, because there's another line into that also, which you're familiar with the work of Dan Pink, and so his thing about sort of autonomy, mastery, and purpose being really important ingredients for motivation. And one of the experiments, because I saw him present at the RSA a few years back, was there are a certain number of tasks that if you incentivize people with financial rewards, they do worse at. The very act of offering an incentive and reward degrades the quality of what you're doing. And he unpacked that to say, often people love what they do because it's purposeful and meaningful, and then get into the flow. And once you're in the flow, you get this sense of self-mastery and intrinsic motivation to do the thing. But once you start putting bananas over it, people's like, I'm now doing it I'm being asked to do it for that reason. It's now become an objective task that gets a reward. It's become you're turning it into a chore. So instead of me advancing the frontier of what I'm doing and using my purposeful and masterfulness and autonomy to discover new things and get the intrinsic rewards of that, you've now turned it into do that thing and you get 2 extra bananas. It's now chorified an adventure into my own self-becoming. It's been like, just climb that and collect these bananas. You degrade the intrinsic exploratory joy of the thing. You've turned it into a chore.
I want to play with something here that's really fascinating, right? The example I'm going to give is the mythological marshmallow test, right? Because what is this set up to do, and what quote unquote wisdom, tarnished wisdom, do we gain from this, right? Put a marshmallow in front of a child is something they want badly. Well, it's, why do we want it badly? More to do with addiction than anything else. Sugar.
Yeah.
And it's something that they want voraciously, this tantalizing salivatory response to sitting in.
Mm.
Now, the experimenter is going to leave the room. Young child, if you wait until I return before eating it, you'll get two. If you taste it while I'm gone, you get none. Or you only get whatever you could taste before I come back. And what does this tell us? Oh, the child's ability to delay gratification. An interesting one, right? In a sense, the degree to which they can tolerate, they can honor, they can respond according to the authority figure's view of what the chore is intended to accomplish and not pay attention to their intrinsic desire. It's a weird sort of a setup that shows a very specific extractive capacity, right? If the child does this, they have very good extraction capacity. Extractability. There's lots of juice in that one. We can put him into something that will make us lots of money. Oh my God, yes, that's a hyper chore detector thing. That's like, yes, no, yuck, yuck, yuck. All right. But think about it. What's the context of what we're trying to do? Now, think about this. You put a child in a room with a seed. It's edible. It's an almond. You say, hey, child, this is an almond. You can eat it. It's somewhat delicious, not as delicious as this thing over here, but if you're hungry, you can eat it. Or if you and your comrades can figure out how to put this in the ground appropriately, it will make almond trees, and eventually you'll be able to get almonds forever. Now, interestingly, that motivation, the deliciousness of it, isn't interesting. That's not the drive for it. All of the work to try to figure it out. But if you think of what just the magic of watching a seed grow into a tree, and it will produce more of these, like forever, or nearly so in my lifetime. Amazingly, that is something we're coming together, discovering the expressiveness of this thing, which is a dance with it, a dance with my comrades, a dance with me, and producing abundance and something that is like, what? And what else can we do with almonds? Lots of things, right? So it's an interesting kind of a very, just a very simple reframing of this to notice the extraction capacity and the curiosity and mapping and territorying that's available when we're actually looking at that. Again, if an experimenter tries to do that, they're looking for where the light is brightest, do this thing that I want you to do. Whereas if you allow the mapping and territorying of the kids, they'll discover not only that, but several other things that no one else discovered, right? That didn't even know that these keys existed.
So I've long thought that this way of thinking is so profoundly important in the world of health, for example. So you imagine a woman coming in, she's pre-diabetic, got concerns about her sugar levels. Now you could say, what you need to do is cut back on this and eat these things and get your sugar into alignment, or you could get diabetes. So you could have a very narrow sort of task. The job is to get that level down. Off you go. Here's a recipe for getting that level down, and then healthcare system is happy. But if you take a broader frame and say, it's your relationship with food, it's relationship with yourself, it's the relationship with how what you do in your world. This is about coming into right relationship with yourself to afford yourself greater possibilities for health. But a lot of women, I don't mean to be sexist here, but are highly instrumental in what food the children are going to eat, what food the husband's going to eat. So if she understands and comes into a better relationship with food and with her, what it is to be healthy, she's now a source of generative value, because she's now taking that knowledge and wisdom and that care and applying it to a greater number of people in her family. So the ripple effect, the generative possibilities of bringing health to a wider community by just helping her not see it's about bringing this level down, but it's an orientation to a healthier form of life that would afford betterment to yourself, and through your great role and responsibility as an actor in the health of others, bring that to a broader community. The idea of generative value. Invest a little bit now, and this thing will keep on giving exponentially into the world. It's so powerful. And it's not, when we get into a transactional relationship with things rather than a relational relationship with things, we don't see what lies the other side of the transaction, the possibilities that we're not realizing by just seeing it, collapsing it into a transaction.
Yes. So amazing. One of the things that that I discovered and was mentioned in the past few days was an organization that was trying to figure out how to restructure their hospital and care delivery. And as they were doing it and automating and doing all sorts of stuff and looking at we have to do this, we have to do that, and we're going to put that all in spreadsheets and figure out and make new agendas and boom, 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 all this stuff. One of the roles that they saw that they looked at and said was the matron. The matron was effectively an overseer of the nurses and communication with, did something of a little bit of relational work with patients, with doctors, with nurses, and looked like just kind of an in-between job. Like, do we need matrons at all? I don't think they do anything. Let's, as we're putting the spreadsheet of all the cost benefit analysis and all this stuff, we'll just snip out the matron and save that money. The whole thing falls apart. It's the binding agent that allows the rest of it to hold together to make cake. Doesn't work anymore. It looks like, like the baking soda or whatever. It's like, what? It's doing something. I can't tell what it's doing. I'll remove it and find out. Oh, it's the thing that allows everything else to do what it does so beautifully. And it looks like it's nothing. The relational looks like it's happens in the hallways, happens. It's not. It's essential. It's not optional. And it's easily overlooked if you're not looking at it through the right lens. It's an exquisite demonstration of this oversight, this not looking over the heads of and trying to optimize in such a way that you really miss the crux of it. There's another aspect of this relational transactional that includes relationality. It can be the philia, right? How are we working together to bring forth more of you and more of me and serve all of us? Transactional that reduces the relationality becomes more extractive. How can I get out of you the value that I can use to do whatever I want to and pay you some wage for that, right? In effect, I'm giving you dollars for your life's blood. And what can you use dollars for? Buying not lifeblood, but stuff that you're addicted to. More time on social media, more sugar, more. Wow, we've really gotten to this weird way of, the good extractors have found a way to pull off the Indiana Jones moment of shuffling the bag of sand for the gemstone that is the thing without toppling over the whole mountain. We can give you a bag of sand. I don't care about it. There's plenty of sand. You don't notice that it's not edible, but I've got the gold from you that I can go and do whatever I want to with.
So I've got an image just popped into my mind there, because as you were saying earlier, words are often, they can be amazing symbols of things and pointers to things, but in some ways their abstractness also loses something of the thing it's pointing to. And therefore you can use words in justificatory ways that, from a transactional point of view, or seem fair and logical and rational, but they fail to connect with the depth of meaning that humans feel behind it. So I had this image that popped into mind of illumination. you imagine the glow in someone, the full realization of their possibilities, of their potential humanity and generative possibilities, that you could see someone as a transaction and take from them, get what you want from their ability of the task, and something of their glow diminishes. But treat them in a relational way that feeds the glow grows, and in that glowing, new affordances are manifested that then have generative possibilities. So I had suddenly this image of the glowing, almost like a glowing ball of affordances inside people that either dim or brighten depending on how we treat people. That might be an interesting visual metaphor to talk about.
Not only is it interesting, I'll say that it's a provocative and very illuminating metaphor to lay on top of the story of the Matrix. Because what is a human being? A battery, a copper top, something to be drained from, right? And as such, what happens if we put them all in a structure, this matrix-like structure that is intended to extract this little bit of wattage from them? It darkens the skies, right? It actually reduces the capacity for us to receive the sunlight to be able to continue to generate. So we go down an ever darkening terrain of burying ourselves deeper within the machinations of the extraction, to the point that we're begging for any glimmer of hope, right? And as such, any glimmer in the cave where it's darkest and deepest becomes a spark which can ignite and illuminate the pathway back to the surface to see the sunlight. I didn't know it was there. It infuses me with new energy, excitement. I go back down into the cave to try to tell the others, there actually is sunlight. Don't bother me. I'm too busy trying to make sense of the shadows. I mean, the allegory of Plato's cave, this trope of what it does, isn't to say, because this is the thing that is interesting and important to pay attention to from the second and third movies. If you just watch the first movie, as many people are, they say the first movie was fantastic, the second and third movie not so much. Why? What is it? It's interesting. It kind of pits me against a nameable opponent, right? It's them that are trying to keep us down, and they can't do it. I'm going to resist. I'll find the way out. But in the second and third movie, what do we find? The them is us. The machines are more of the same. The machinations are the structures of control that we have put in place that are dimming our own light. We created these machines, which are doing the thing that is extracting. And this dance of extraction is, as long as we're doing the more extracting, we're becoming parasitic. And eventually I'm going to run out of, if I over-parasitize my host, shit, it dies and I die.
I've listened to a few Forrest things recently, because every now and again I always find him quite nourishing. And he was talking about this. He was contrasting the dialogos and maybe David Rogue's interlogos as being incredibly generative of, I come to know myself through my relationship with you, and the dance that we do today reveals something of myself, it reveals something of yourself, it reveals something of the world, and the richer we dance, the more is revealed in myself and others. So my relationship with myself and my others in the world is enhanced by the richness of our dialogos and our interlogos. And therefore, if we as humanity are going to evolve and develop further beautiful possibilities, we need to engage in that rich dialogos in a more profound and deep and meaningful way than we've ever done before. And if we would think carefully about our new technologies, we makes possible more dialogos and more interlogos, but it needs to be oriented around the quality of that generative way of being with each other. However, we have appeared on the scene are these things. And as he said, there is an addictive quality built into them that seems to show the promise of something really interesting and attention grabbing. So we go on to it. But those algorithms of addiction are connected to a central algorithm of extraction. So governing the show behind the scenes, and as an extractive model that seeks to draw our attention into narrow things that serve the benefits of that centralized algorithmic model. So what we're trading is our attention and the quality of our dialogos with each other for that which this addictive algorithm is drawing our attention into, that's serving a centralized algorithm that wants some extractive subset of who we are to feed a business model that drives power and profit. So we're draining ourselves of our possibilities and of our affordances for that dialogue as an interdialogue, is to be drawn into this addictive realm that is in feeding a centralized algorithm that has an extractive model behind it. So we devaluing, our glow is diminishing while thinking that it's being enriched by the sort of addictive front end that's put on it that promises also. It's almost like, oh, look, there's a hole in the ground with lots of flashing lights in it. Let's go and have a look inside this cave. Ooh, this is fun. But there's something at the bottom of the cave beckoning us back out of reality down into the cave. It's the dynamics of the matrix.
Yes, I want to share something because this is perfect setup for a lot of things that I've been talking about with Kylie, but a very key thing that I haven't yet shared with her that has been deep in me and waiting to find a way to come to the surface. And I want to do it by sharing my screen and looking a little bit at the Kairotic Flow, because there's an aspect of the Kairotic Flow. So I'm gonna do this, bring this up to the screen. Hang on just a moment. That's the wrong one. By the way, certainly let me know if we get to a point where you need to go, obviously, right?
No, I'm fine. There's no need to go.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to bring.
I'm enjoying this conversation.
Yeah, I know this is rich. This is rich. I'm gonna do it with a couple of different screens. There we go. Let me see if I can share screen and do this in a way that's gonna work. Is this right? No, that's not the right one. One moment. An interesting book, by the way, discovered it from when I was in Las Vegas, Becoming with a Q. Interesting. I don't know much about it yet, but we'll find out more later. Is it this one? No, it's not what I wanted. Dang it, hang on a second. I need to minimize this. There we go. Minimize. Now I should be able to share a screen with that. Difficulty is just a moment. Slideshow present. Minimize screen. There we go. Now. Zoom. Share that. Go. Voila. All right. Back to market state and commons. There's something really interesting with this. There are a couple of features of this that I want to point out. I'm a curator primarily. I identify most closely, most natively with the curator archetype. I'm not a curator. I I express the curator archetype very natively, right? As such, my neighbors, steward and scout, I also do. I'm assuming, I'm this may actually, I may actually want to use this recording later. So I'll just say, I'm assuming that anybody who's reading this is not at all familiar. Go read Kylie's stuff and look at the Kairotic Flow. If I put this out there in the world, I'll put the show notes to link you to discovering it. But Andy, you and I have looked at this before, so these archetypes are present. Certainly, if there's any question about it, let me know, because I've been immersed in it very deeply. But the curator, so there's a couple of features of the axes on this. One is this vertical axis where on the right-hand side it's orange, on the purple side, on the left-hand side it's purple. This expresses sunlight and lack of sunlight. So this illumination thing is kind of an interesting one, right? Because this is sunlight from what? This is the reason that we spend a lot of time, and Kylie's contention is that we spend a lot of time pioneer, settler, town planner, and then back to pioneer. We sort of short circuit the full cycle and don't give as much attention to steward, curator, and scout. Because why? Because there is enough to be extracted to spend all the time in the daylight. There are enough keys to be dug that putting out the street lights and digging all the gemstones and fruits out from underneath the lampposts, we can extract for a long time, except that pathological demand avoidance, the berry picking under the lamps has been largely done. Digging underneath the lamppost is no longer beneficial. Finding the internal light going into the shadow and finding new sparks of interest of things that we've never discovered is necessary. But because we've been doing this daytime cycle for so long, the addiction to sunlight is very, very strong. And so the tendency to go into the dark is scary. The dark is scary from where we're at. We've lived in the daylight so long. But there's stuff in the underground. There's stuff in the beneath that must be explored and expounded and felt in order to be able to mycelially create new connections that will allow us to do the kinds of things that we need to discover that are beyond this, that will start to have the new glimmers of light from within, illumination and the glow that allows us to find new tendrils of exploration and new sources of nutrient that can allow us a new day to dawn. So it's just been a period of extracting as much daylight as we can from the oil underground, right? And we're almost at the end of it. That means the end of an epoch, and we must enter a new epoch. The epoch starts with entering the darkness. Stewards are the edge of that, and they do something. But so far, they've been the gift that they've been offered. The extraction for them is their stewarding capacity. They're no longer stewarding the full cycle; they're stewarding the daylight. And there's something about that the more that we do that, it allows for, and I want to name something here. I want to go back and look at it and say, my language has a kind of a way of going back to the nounification and the victim triangle aspect of it, right? The nounification is saying steward as if it's a person, right? Steward as an archetype isn't, but this is the thing about Forrest Landry's mapping thing, of noticing the direction that we want to go. We have reset our compass to stay in the daylight. That's what we've done. Why? Because that's where all of the gifts are. So stewards are finding territory where there isn't as much daylight. What do? We create artificial light that simulates daylight. That kind of does something, but it's an extractive thing. It's going to end at some point. But it's not because the steward is a bad person. It's because of the overriding goal that we appear to be following and the terrain that we're in. We're running out of it, so we need to maximize the ability to find berries in places. So we built incandescent lamps that will shine light on the shadows that we see, right? That's one aspect of the thing, is this daylight and nighttime polar aspect of it. There's another dimension of this, which is kind of interesting, which is partly highlighted by this line here that separates curator, scout, and pioneer, settler, town planner, and steward. it's a different axis that divides up this circle in a different way. And this half, curator, scout, and pioneer, are more intrinsically motivated, with scout being the most intrinsic of the intrinsic motivation people. Curators are largely intrinsically motivated, but are neighbors with stewards and are fed by stewards. So we have a kind of an ability, people expressing the curator archetype have a capacity to bridge some of the extrinsic, intrinsic. Pioneers also are on this boundary. They connect with scouts, so they know deeper intrinsicness from that near neighbor relationship, but they also bridge this gap of intrinsic and extrinsic. This, what do I know that might work, and what do I know that might work so well that we can exponentially exploit it, right? So pioneers and curators do an interesting job of discerning between extrinsic stuff and intrinsic. In a sense, we're on the membrane. We're on the inside of the membrane of extrinsic, intrinsic. Stewards and settlers are on the external membrane of intrinsic, extrinsic, of this global enterprise of what we're doing as a species, as a mega a hyper goal that we're doing. And scouts are the most deeply intrinsic, town planners are the most deeply extrinsic. They're trying to do the most, the code that allows perpetuation of extrinsicness, right? The scout is the most deeply related to the DNA. They know the internal code of the most deeply intrinsic. That tension line between this axis point is also very important. The third tension line that I'll point out is the multi-tension line. There's a tension between scout and town planner. Scout is the most intrinsic. Town planner is the most extrinsic. This pole between them, they have a tug of war. They have an amazing sensitivity to the balance of where on this polar divide they are, the tug of war. The scout knows it doesn't want intrinsicness for all intrinsic sake. The town planner kind of knows it doesn't want extrinsic for all extrinsic sake. It wouldn't, if it thought it didn't need the scout at all, it would be kind of like if these tension lines between the various archetypes went away, it's like the matron going away in the healthcare thing, that the glue that binds the whole circle together falls apart. And this is no longer a proper tensegrity. These tension lines between this balancing between intrinsic and extrinsic on this axis are crucial. Curator and settler are doing a different kind of a polar opposition across this tension line. I'm too close to curator to kind of know what that is. In some sense, a curator is paying attention to the deepest cycle of night and is paying attention to what must die and what must be born. It is, if I were to look at these as the fates, the needles, the weaver, the three fates that are weavers, the curator is the scissors that snips it, and the settler is the exponentiation of more of that, more of that, more of that. The generation of thread and the snipping of the thread. Maybe I'm off my normal plan. I'm in the moment doing mapping. Take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. I'm exploring what these archetypes do. But the steward and pioneer also have a tension between them. And this is the initiation of something new, like taking, this is one of the things that Kylie says that I think is really important is this boundary right here. When we're crossing from night into day at dawn is the only time birth actually happens. Emerging from the underworld into the light, into the new light of a new day, is the only time birth actually happens. And birth as viableness, right? Pioneers do the initial caretaking of this new emergent life form to nurture it from birth to the point where it starts to be able to do its own learning, right? Market is where it starts to do its own learning. Pioneers start to do that. Settlers go into high development of deep learning, right? Town planners start to get to the waning edge of the learning. How do we make sure that the learning took? Let's find out the assessments, the tests, and so forth that value, whether or not something is or is not, the code that does that. And stewards are the ones that moving back into the night and to the night phase, but still on this extrinsic side, are looking at building the schools and the libraries, the ones that are figuring out what major features will allow the extrinsic side to function well and the whole balance of the thing. Curators are like, okay, which of these features or attributes of the global thing no longer serve us at all? It's time for these to be composted. And which new things are ready to be, what needs do we have that we haven't noticed that need to be conceived? The scout and the deep intrinsicness does the conception. It does it's interesting. Kylie would shoot me for saying this, because in some sense, the conception isn't a thing that the scout is doing. The conception is the thing the scout is realizing. It is the deep receptivity that allows the conception to happen. It's not doing it, it's receiving the conception. And the conception goes to maturation and a new birth happens. So this cycle of going through these is these various tension points between the archetypes, between the halves, and this extrinsic and intrinsic thing. Those dynamic tensions in the flow of the cycle does a kind of a thing, but we can see where we get a little lopsided, right? Where in the way that a vine knows that there's some reason to keep growing on that side, we know as a species there's a reason to keep growing on this side towards the sunlight. But at some point, we've grown far enough and we must either twist around or die off and birth something new, right?
No, I like that very much.
I want to take a pause, just to kind of let me settle for just a second, and I definitely want to hear from you, and I'll allow you to speak. But I want to kind of there was something that I was going for originally that I didn't quite get to, and I don't want to do now. It's too pregnant. I want to aerate, but I want to kind of settle for a moment.
Our lead into this was the conversation about the Plato's cave and the orientation, possibly by some aspects of the market that would want to draw our attention and find our expression of ourselves in that light. So that the commons becomes defined by what the light reveals back to it, which is wholly unhealthy. I just wanted to ask a clarifying question.
Yes.
Market and state, are these sort of metaphors for building things? Because, I mean, there are not-for-profit and community groups, which is almost, if you like, the commons trying to serve itself through institutional structures that aren't necessary to do with traditional market profit dynamics. So is market more a metaphor for collective organizations, institutions that may be profit-based or non-profit-based?
I'm going to try something here to look at it. This is popping up just now based on what I've been doing for the past couple of days. So I'm going to try to put a new, the thing that feels most true to me right now. It's exploratory, so not, yeah. Don't take this as etched in stone. This is just a light pencil sketch. There's something that the market that is the epitome of relational. It is trade. It's the trade language. Jordan Hall, in a recent conversation with John Vervaeke and Greg Enriquez, episode 11 of the Transcendent
Naturalism.
Yeah, was talking about the three functions of language. One of them is trade language, right? The trade language. I'm gonna torture this a little bit, but it doesn't. I can see already as I'm laying that map on top of this one, it doesn't quite cohere, because the three functions that he names are familial, family communication, as a one function of language, trade language between families or tribes, and sacred language between self and transcendent. Self could be self as an individual, self as a tribe, self as a larger thing. But this almost inner outer. Actually, this works. So I would say that this is beautiful. This actually works out really well. I would say that this is the trade. The market side is trade. Pioneer and settler do two expressions of trading. Initial, from the initial little what's an idea to do something, to the full maturation of a incorporation and deep productivity, right? This is that trade in motion. But notice these are archetypes, not people. The whole circle benefits from the trade, but the archetypes are the ones who focus on what the trading is doing, right? I would say that the state is the familial. It's the family. It is, in some sense, the town planners are doing one aspect of the coding and paying attention to. The stewarding are in this sense, the patriarchs and matriarchs of the family. The matriarch and the matron in the story that I told earlier was paying attention that the things were all balanced in a way, right? In some sense, the health institution that decided matron was no longer needed was saying that stewards were no longer needed, where stewards acted as a kind of glue to bring these things in. Again, it's an extrinsic awareness that pays attention to the binding. Does the cake hold together or not? But this kind of code-based, this solidification of relationship into something that is almost, it holds its shape without us even attempting to do it. Jordan Hall mentioned this as there's a kind of mind reading almost. Like, in a sense, we don't do the town planner, if it's really doing its job, isn't going around telling everyone which laws they're breaking all the time on a day-to-day basis. For the most part, you should be acting within the realms of what you're doing. And only when you step over the line should the town planner say, oh, nope, hold on. You've done something out of bounds here. Policing and refining. This is kind of the legislative and executive branch a little bit. Some of the executive happens over here in stewarding, right? But this is the familial, the family function of language down here. And I would claim that the commons is the sacred. And what I mean by here, it's deeply in the heart of the intrinsic, but it's paying attention to the distinction between inside and outside. The intrinsic side of me is the deepest part of the participatory knowing. The extrinsic part is the most ephemeral of the propositional. And the dance between these two things is essential to be able to know the difference between, is the propositional actually reaching the participatory? Scouts seem to know this most deeply. Curators know it from this other place of something else, but it's this sacred, this from within to without relationship that this sacred language does. And an interesting way with this division of trying to stay in the daylight, we pay much more attention to market with a little bit of state, the town planner part of the state. Again, without noticing it, what are the stewards doing? Are they doing anything at all? Do we need them? They're kind of old guys, which are really, they just keep talking about, the old days or something beautiful that, like, it's getting in the way of profit, right? Let's just figure out how to, hey, steward, can you just motivate the pioneers to do something interesting new? So they go through this cycle and in a sense, cutting off the access to this deep night cycle. And the more we cut off the deep night cycle, the more the whole is moved into the darkness. interestingly weird, right? This whole enterprise is moving more to the darkness because we're relying less on the internal illumination and glow of each of the archetypes adding to the whole, and more of the ones in the daylight using extrinsic kind of light to do that. So marketing is a relationship. A lot of that is conversational and moving between internal and external. In this mode, if we get stuck in this daytime cycle, the steward, curator, and scout, notice the curator and scout, this whole sacredness is buried overall. Part of the sacred, no, part, so this sacred, both aspects of the sacred are skipped. If we're doing fully just dawn to dusk, stay in the light. Stewards get a little bit of the light, and so there is a kind of familial, the patron matron of the family that is doing sort of a guidance feedback loop is used to do this rather than allowing the resourcing to go to the overturning and composting that which needs to go and setting the conditions for allowing a new conception, which will give rise to a new birth. So in a sense, we're using resources that we're in a kind of a winter phase where we're only subsisting on the calories that we stored from last year. We're no longer, weirdly, I can see that this is strange. As I'm saying this, and my mind is doing a flip-flop, because this isn't actual daylight that's coming in. This is artificial light. This is living on the artificial light. And as long as we're living on the artificial light and no longer allowing for new stewarding, curation, and scouting, we're running down our batteries. We're actually depleting we're draining the copper top. Because all of this light over here generated it comes from extracting from the batteries, that the storage that we built in the previous cycle where we actually had natural light. How does that do in terms of the sense of what market and state and commons are doing? Does that jive, and do any new ideas come up out of that? Any criticisms as well? The whole thing.
Well, I wanted to explore an angle into this based on our earlier conversation. The sort of we were exploring, I think, in part what Forrest was talking about in terms of how the market can be draw us into an extractive relationship, promising something, but actually having an operating code that's running the extraction model that pretends to be something that seduces us in and diverts our attention away from dialogue. So you could think, to use David Rugg's terminology, the market has this kind of monologos view of the commons because it has some stuff that it's built and wants to sell. And the more it can persuade the commons that the monologos is the source of nutrients for itself, the more we will look into the market as market broadly construed. Let's put lump market and state together then, as centralized figures that provide the nutrients that allow the commons to function. And what I'd quite like to explore, and I haven't got my thoughts fully formed, so this is kind of really at the exploratory edge, but I'm trying to merge a couple of concepts together. So in its most, I always like to think about things along a continuum, because it kind of helps to draw out the fact that there is no exact point into it, but where you are on the continuum points out possibly to the absurdities or to the damage going too far in one direction might have. So if you think of the market state duopoly as being the maximally active agent in its monologous relationship with the commons, like everything you need comes from us. And therefore you become entirely and utterly dependent on the state and market for all things that nourish your life. But there is a problem with that, as we know, because products and services have this transactional aspect to them. Here's the thing that we offer. Here's the thing that we think is good for you. Here's the either cost something or you're entitled to this thing. So it's a bunch of things you can get. So there's a thingification of what it is that you need to nourish yourself and others in the commons. So it's based and derived out of a kind of transactional orientation to things that the commons can use. Now, if we go back to the conversation we were having earlier about that Forrest was talking about, which is I find myself in you and you in me, and through that mutual investigation, through the dialogos, we come to know ourselves and others more richly. So you could talk about that as a sort of spiritual, cognitive, emotional unveiling of the depth of our mutual reality. But into that dialogos will also become awareness of what I need, you need, what we need, and what we individually might be able to contribute to the needs of the other. Now, maybe it's just being heard, being listened to, but maybe it's, I can help you, you can help me, we can help each other. And through acting out what the dialogos reveals, there's a kind of binding energy that brings us closer together in mutual affordances and dependencies and relationships that manifest in us actually doing things for each other. And there's something rich in that binds within relationality the commons to itself in ways that enable it to manifest its own affordances for itself. So if you imagine a scale of things that could be done to nourish the commons, what is it that needs to come from without that can be added into the commons to afford its own flourishing? And what is it that the commons itself could generate within itself as its own depth of becoming? And what is the sort of dance between that? I mean, of course, the commons is not going to be able to develop automobiles or smart technologies. That will have to come from an institutional context outside of the commons that can make those kind of things in ways that are sensitive to the needs of the commons. But I've been doing some research recently in my hometown when I've been up looking after my parents. And it's basically a project being done to investigate what is it that older people, it's just one subsection of the community, what are the unmet needs that they have that could yield some insights about what the community could be doing to support itself. Because at the moment, there's this tendency that either you depend on the market or the state has increasingly infiltrated into the lives of individuals and families and commons to say, if you get into problems, then the state will come in and sort things out. So you can have some benefits or some social services. They'll come in and do these things, but they're very transactional. They're very limited. They're constrained. They're pieces of a solution, but they're not embedded into the lived context of people. And therefore, there's a kind of misfit that's painful. So as people start to depend on the state to do more things to support people in need who are struggling or infirm or isolated, that relationship isn't wholly nutritious. There's a codependency that's painful, both for the state and for those in the commons that depend upon it. And there's a kind of evacuation of the commons helping itself because the state can now do that thing that we used to gather around and help our community to do. So it's been interesting doing that research, sitting with older people to talk about what are their unmet needs, their sort of physical ones, their emotional ones, even their spiritual ones. And what you see is a set of unmet needs that no institution can come in and give them there's the thing, you're sorted. These are ones that would be nourished and afforded through a greater dialogos within the community that manifests into shared understanding of what is mine to give and what can you give. And there are a couple of people I've interviewed who are amazing. There's one guy in his 90s who spends a lot of his time going around to help other older people. And he'll go around and do their shopping for them. He'll go around and listen to them and talk to them. And he provides a service of great value to others, of which they value him. He feels meaningful and purposeful in his old age because he's able to contribute something meaningful rather than just sit there and watch daytime TV or whatever. The stories of his sort of age and his experience are shared around. So there's a sort of circling and cycling of stories of us, our history, our communal coming together. There's a kind of binding, a sense of we're belonging, and being able to take people around and do their shopping and take them places. There's, the local coffee shops or whatever get some benefit from this as well. So there's the beauty of that dialogos that reveals to itself what we need at an more intimate level, which is relationally driven and manifested, not transactionally researched, but relationally revealed, affords an opportunity within the commons for some bottom-up deepening of the bonds of the commons, of a sense of we-ness that's solidified by this dialogus manifesting in shared actions that we can do together. And how can things like technology and capabilities being developed in the market be repositioned, or in the state, repositioned in service of those types of nourishing activity that's possible from the ground up into the commons? I mean, you could imagine, these are very trivial examples, but if self-driving cars become a reality and maybe I've got one or our community has some, then if I'm not using it, then maybe I could lease it to my community and they could help older people move around and get to places they couldn't do before. So all sorts of possibility of new technology put in service of nourishing the dialogos within the community that drives a richness and a binding and a sense of community that strengthens the commons identity, and through that also enables a more shared understanding of its expressed needs. Because at the moment, if people are individuated, how do we know what the commons needs? We can look at that through each agent as an individual, but what does the collective need? And what I like about forests, one angle of forest work, is that in order for the commons to be nourished, the commons has to come together to develop a shared understanding and expression of what it needs, such that other actors can speak to that shared understanding. And scouts can play a role as the outsider going in and trying to sort of take the temperature. But if the commons could speak with a more shared voice of understanding, then that scouting activity could yield much deeper insight, much richness, a fullness of understanding that could orient market and state to couple to the real needs of the commons, rather than doing to the commons, which we often see from the market and state. Mm. I'll leave it there just as
really rich. I'm letting the music of the player run over the instrument here, just like listening to it resonate in me. And several ideas. It's interesting. It's in some sense following less the extrinsic meaning, kind of letting the ideas, the chords and subtonalities, the overtones and things sort of mix in. It's beautiful. So in some way, I don't have a way to respond directly to that, but the feeling of yes, this the way in which I'm going to share a little bit here. I don't know if you could see my cursor on the
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So there's a way that it occurs to me that we are dominated primarily by this extrinsic intrinsic divide, to the extent that extrinsicness is looking at extraction, right? And town planners
just want to drop something in here, because I think it sort of cuts through to its when we talk about extrinsic, intrinsic, or the market and the common. I think what I'm shining a light on is, if we look through the lens of relationality versus transactionality, and we have this notion we were talking earlier about this sort of inner glow of my personhood either being cultivated and called to shine forth with all the benefits that would come, versus an extractive relationship where my light goes dimmer. Thinking about relationality as a way of encouraging those lights to glow and shine forth in a greater way. I guess I'm speaking to whatever this activity is it contributing to the greater shining or a dimming? And does relationality give us a way into that challenge better than transactionality?
Beautiful. I have to name as well. A lot of my language and my exposition is informed by the fact that I center on the curator dynamic, and so I'm on the boundary of extrinsic intrinsic, and so that membrane between steward and curator is one in which I'm hypersensitive to. So it makes sense that I would pay attention to, on the one hand, this feeling of extrinsic intrinsic is an important boundary, and it feels like we're focusing too much on the extrinsic aspect of it and not enough on the intrinsic. The hey, can I have a moment to speak on the? Can I get the microphone just for a second to make a point of something? No, we're busy. It's an interesting kind of a dynamic. I also want to name that that one of the things that Kylie has. I'm gonna pause for a moment and look at the meta structure of what Kairotic Flow does from my perspective. One of the things that Kylie names in her she's working on a book, and she's put an Indiegogo thing together with a little video that's a really worthwhile. It's a short little video. I posted it on my Facebook, but the sense of a map, that this is in a sense a map that's showing something, and I get a little bit itchy with the notion of map. It communicates to a lot of people, right? But here's the thing: a map is the resource of a previous mapping, and it highlights certain activities based on a moment in time where we were observing and laying out relationships of features of landscape to the map, right? So the mapping and the territorying resulted in its artifact, which is what the affordances that we know about are, how they're related to the geography of the topography of where we are in that moment. And so in a moment, it's a snapshot that can provide a kind of feedback, but it's no longer the isness. The more that we pave with things, the more we deviate from that map, and it becomes obsolete within a period of time. But mapping as an activity will continue to come back to that tension between territorying and mapping, right? That mapping will create new artifacts, which will dance with old artifacts, but update them, keep them kind of fresh. And each person, so mapping is one thing. Verbify the noun to get it a little bit more current. There's another aspect which is interesting. A friend of mine and I were talking about the fact that a GIS, geographical information system, does something interesting that isn't just a map. It allows you to select which features. So Google Maps does this now, right? We have somewhat of an experience with this. Am I looking at the satellite view? Am I looking at the topographical view? Am I looking at the street view? Each of these are, I could do the weather view, right? So each of these things is a way of highlighting a certain layer that shows different affordances based on my current motivation of what I'm doing. And if I try to lay all of those on top of the map simultaneously, it's just a jumble. I can't tell what it is. So the one thing is it current and staying current? The other is am I able to select the layers of relevance that show me how this cohesion goes? Another one is different from the currency or not. Is it current? But what was it like 10 years ago? What am I projecting it will be like 10 years from now based on the best, so this current thing kind of I can do something. This is a really interesting thing. I'm riffing here. I'm gonna riff on my riff for just a second. If I use it this way of noticing the different archetypes and the way that we're doing this, there's something here that allows me to project into the future a possibility of what it might look like. And I can justify, for whatever reason, what attributes I think that are pointing to that. And then I can later say, how accurate was that? Was I on or off? And if so, what did I miss? What features of the map that I predicted didn't express because some other feature prevented that from happening, right? Oh, it looks like GDP is going up. So, ta-da. Moore's law. I can point to the future and say, with relative certainty, that computers are going to get faster at a doubling rate of 18 months and at a cost reduction of 1/2 and power. So I can predict that that's the case. At the point that it stops doing that, what changed? That's interesting. It did that for a long time, and now we're in a territory where this compass is no longer reliable. I can no longer extract that tendency of a temporal directionality to the map and the updating of the map. I better pay attention. We're in a place where we've reached a new tangent, a new cliff, a new hillock, something that is no longer acting in the same predictable way that we did before. It's an incredible amount of feedback. If I'm doing the mapping, I can't tell that by looking at a static map. I have to do the mapping, and in some sense, it's extenuated by the GISing. But in looking at this and paying attention to it, map falls down a little bit as a metaphor, even if I turn it into a verb, even if I turn it into the GISing of the layers, and even if I turn it into the verbing of the GIS layers and the temporality of the projection, all of those things still fall down a little bit. Because why? Because in a sense, it's a lens. It acts as a scope. And as a scope, it's not just one lens. Each archetype is a kind of lens that acts as a different kind of a scope. And it's a holographic activity. So it's not just a telescope. It's not just a microscope. It's a holoscope, which allows me to look at holons and the relationship of holons at a higher level and a lower level. So on one level, me looking at my intrinsicness of what I am as a curator trying to do in this moment in this conversation is related to, but distinct from, what I, as Andy and David, are doing and the curating, pioneering aspects of what we're doing. So there's a way in which this, what's the term that John Vervaeke uses for the, I want to say transoptic, but the two views at the same, the synoptic integration of our particular perspectives and lenses allows us for a variety of different kinds of ways of using this holoscope at different scales and times and layers. And immediately it's like, holy moly, how do you learn to drive one of those scopes? Only through experience and relating, right?
Yeah, there's another difficulty with that metaphor also, is that the terrain isn't fixed. It's it's shifting and unfolding itself. So
yes,
the map is it's trying to map something that's unfolding and changing its own dynamics. And to layer something else on that is that whatever this system is that's engaging with that territory, there is a recursive relationship. Whatever I do changes the system. and therefore should influence what I'm doing, and being able to discern which are the unfolding patterns that are endemic into the terrain itself, and what is my impact on that, to discern the difference, because there's underlying things that have their own momentum and their own qualities, but there's also the impact that I'm having. So how do I know whether what I'm doing is working, and how do I, if I do see change, is it because of me, or is it because of what's intrinsic within the system itself? And how do I discern the difference so I can be more expert in how I intervene and what I contribute? So there's the movingness of it.
Yes.
So, and also the orientation. Is there a sense in which this whole story can orient to badness or goodness, and how would we discern, and what are the vectors that underpin its ability to move in one direction or another?
So interestingly, lovely. It brings out another feature of this lensing, mapping, territorying thing that we're doing. That is a different feature of this, is the speed with which change is happening. Right. One is the directionality and prediction of it, but from the perspective of, I'm going to contrast two different things. From the perspective of the time scale that we're used to, that we're operating in, human scale, looking at it, we look at the undulation of the landforms. It doesn't look like anything's happening. Occasionally, there will be an earthquake. The landforms are moving, but it happens in this, it's a little bit abrupt even for us. The seasons are a kind of change in the landscape, but it's a feature set of the landscape, and it kind of goes in a regular thing. And fall comes and it lasts for a little while. It sometimes a cold day comes in, and then and the leaves fall, and then and then it's winter, and then it snow falls. And the cycles do something, a more muted long-term thing. But an avalanche is also one of those things, like how the snow builds up on the mountain and then one day it falls. Each of these behaviors of the kinds of things that happen on the geologic scale, from our perspective, are these have an inner and outer membrane. From the geographic time scale, or maybe even not that much, but like a species level day, right? A species comes into existence and goes out of existence. From that scale, the landscape is doing some little undulation with this boom, 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 boom. It's like, it's a staccato. It is a drum thing, right? It is like it's keeping the rhythm of the behaviors that we see as this flow occurs at another scale as a clap. So it's, and when we do that in reverse, and if I think of Kylie's fond of naming the time that she spent on the sea in a boat, that she orients to landscapes as perpetually moving. There isn't any point of orientation which is static in the way that a landlubber believes so, right? So her mountains are moving all the time. The flow and the synchrony and the coordinateness of the waves and the way they do in the boat and all of that stuff has a much more dynamic thing. Movement of land masses is informative on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment action that is not possible for someone who lives on land to experience.
I think another piece to throw in, and this is what I was sharing with the team on Friday, which was my best attempt at articulating the third attractor stuff, which is, because of where we are at this moment in history, there is the sort of the unfolding story, and how do we understand it and nudge and speak to that. But there is the meta story, which the total unfolding of all that we're doing as humanity is destabilizing the substrate we're on, putting exponential technologies in that could rapidly break some of the systemic features of the world, the international supply chains, the possibility of ever increasing exponentially powerful weapons that will make possible conflicts that could destabilize. I've got some thing on the screen there. So how do we bind that? So for the first time in history, it's not just what we see around us and how we sort of from the bottom up build and nudge that. We have to look at the bigger stability of the whole and what there are contours of a future that's sustainable and possible, and many that are not, that we now also need to become aware of and internalize them as some sort of guiding constraints of how we think about this particular story. Because I've been using sort of the man, machine, and nature, that a flourishing humanity on a flourishing planet has to be some kind of orientation to the future that doesn't lead us to either destroying the substrate in which the game of life is dependent upon, or continuing a conflictual relationship and the likelihood of greater conflict and self-destruction. So whether we destroy ourselves because of destroy the substrate we're on, or we destroy ourselves because the inequalities and conflict that we would augment through our exponential technology also bring us to a point of collapse. So a flourishing humanity on a flourishing planet, and how do we bring our technology writ large, which is economic systems, political systems, healthcare systems, education systems, transport systems, materials, supply chains, how do we bring those in service of a flourishing humanity and a flourishing planet, rather than being at a meta level extractive of the planet and of ourselves in ways that destabilizes that? So if it were to be in service of that, what would it mean for health? What would it mean for education? What would it mean for aviation? What would it mean for materials? What would it mean for food? And what would it mean for us in this place doing our thing in support of that bigger thing? So can we work back recursively from the right relationship between man, machine, and nature, right the way down the stack to what does it call upon us in this place doing these things? What's ours to do in service of that greater orientation? Because there are a bunch of things we could do tactically which would seem to solve problems locally, but actually take us or contribute to the greater harm. There's ways we could do it that could contribute towards the greater good. Can we know enough about the orientations to internalize those as guiding principles for how we address what we see in front of us now in this locality at this particular time in this particular place?
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because at the scale of the thing that Kylie's talking about, living on a boat and being aware of all of that, often the thought of problem solution isn't as dominant in her awareness. It's stimulus response. Oh, something's happening. Something needs to happen. We just move in the thing of happening. We don't say, let's analyze what this is and get a rope expert to come in and figure out, no. You don't have time for that. You've got to be in the flow. And if you're not in the flow, then you're missing something. So this problem and solutioning is a luxury of being able to have a time scale in which we can stop and reflect and look and do a full, more deep dive cycle of this. Those moments happen when, as a sailor, you go back into port and may put your boat in dry dock and fix some things and go buy supplies. Okay, what things do we wish we had on the boat that we don't have? What did we have too much of that we need to get rid of? So you have these moments where you can change essentially the time scale of change. You can accelerate or decelerate the rate of change in such a way that you can make different decisions on a different way and then get back into it and go back into the flow again. So the flow never stops, but it does do time scale, and it does have qualities of the staccato and this stasis, right? There are moments of time where it feels like it's so slow that nothing's happening at all. And then this other kind of rhythmic flow and harmonious to and froing, right? And
I think also if you internalize that bigger call for what's ours to do to contribute to the bigger story over and above the call for the practical things that call upon us in this moment, there's potentially those one marshmallow, two marshmallow dilemmas will start to appear, because we could get away with doing this one one marshmallow thing here, which on the face of it, everyone will be really happy about, but we're actually doing something in a slightly shittier way that is going to do harm to this. Is there a better way of doing this that, and how do we justify that when it would seem like the one marshmallow thing is the most practical thing that we could all get on and do and get the benefit from? So how do we not turn it into your thing about, is it just a two marshmallow, one marshmallow thing, or is there a story and a narrative that's built around this, which is a calling to a higher transcendent set of possibilities that can help us in those two marshmallow decisions? Because there is a moral, aspirational, transcendental story that can give us the will and the energy and the ability to invest for a better future, not just take what we can for the now.
Yes. I know that we have uncovered a lot.
Yes.
And there's a lot here. We're a little bit more than 2 hours into it. It's very rich. There's something else I would like to do. It feels pregnant for me to share. I don't know if there's even room for it, for you to receive it. I want to just check in and see. How are you doing?
I'm okay. I'm okay. I think I'm probably
Yes.
on the top of the S curve. So
Yes, beautiful. I'll name a couple of things just as thoughts to explore at a future point. So this is, just to name them as features of this that I think are kind of interesting to notice. And it's something that came about. I'm really looking at the experience of working with Kylie on this, which is there's a way that neighbors work together and opponents work together that's very different. So neighbors can't properly grasp something without an opposing grasper. There's almost has to be something over here. Whereas people are more clearly in the opposite, can grasp more, right? So the affordances that give graspability have to do with oppositionality and opposability. Oppositionality against each other, opposability with each other, and that dance allows for something. It can happen with neighbors and an opponent, but the nearest neighbors have a very tough time grasping something if they're trying to do the opposable thing with each other, and they don't have a third that can do that. The third could be a person, or if I look at Kylie and I are dancing in the commons, what is needed, the third might be the membrane between market and state. It's interesting. It could be a settler, could be a town planner relationship, it could be someone else. And actually, the three of us together can do something interesting where curator, scout, and pioneer, there were conversations where we did that. We can sense something. We can almost create a focusing bowl that looks at something that we want to do. So this way in which I interact with my near neighbor is interesting, but it also can be quite contentious, because what Kylie feels as most important to pay attention to is centered in her center of gravity of awareness, where she's operating as scout. And what mine is over here under curator. And in a sense, we can kind of fight back and forth. Interestingly, when I watch kittens fighting, they're doing something like this. They're each fighting for something, but what they're doing is they're training not only the use of their claws and their teeth and their posture and their stance and their ability to stalk, but also their sensitivity to how much the other can take. I'm not really trying to kill you, but I'm trying to express something, and you won't let me, and I need to get it out. Oh, scream! Okay, I didn't mean to hurt you. But this training of our claws and teeth and stance is not as allowed in our culture these days. In a sense, we tamp that down. So our claws are dull and our teeth are falling out and our stance is like sloppy. And so we're not as properly poised for the moment where we need to come into full action. And so there's something that without this kind of dynamic dialogos between neighbors that is contentious and playful, we lose the sharpness of our response time and our capacity for knowing where our claws are. Are they sharp enough and are too sharp? And so it's an interesting dynamic that happens in that aspect. Something that I want to highlight and say, there's a way in which something like when you watch Harry Potter series and as a wizard, Harry Potter, before he went to Hogwarts, had no way to sharpen his teeth and claws or get a stance. He needed to go to a place where he was able to do something. And yes, there's danger. Sometimes some of the kids get eaten by a dragon or swallowed by a chessboard. And it's actually dangerous, but I have to know what that is in order to be able to tune my capacity to know what I'm capable of, what I am able to bring, what of the juice that I can share can be shared with all of the community to bring forth something more. And if I'm in a place where my magic is disallowed, it atrophies.
One of the most formative periods of my life was finding myself in student accommodation where I lived. It almost sounds like a comedy. In fact, there was a comedy here in the UK called The Young Ones, which I often smirk when I see because it's so close to work. So I was living in this shared accommodation. It was £13 a week because it was condemned accommodation owned by the state that was considered too bad to put people in it, but they would let it out to students. So it was like the ceiling was collapsing in, there was mold on the walls. It was just like a horrible place. And in this, it was just floorboards. There was no even carpets. And I was living in there with an anarchist, a communist, and a nihilist. And we used to have this most amazing conversation. We were like bouncing off the walls because the extreme positions in the room were just incredible. But in being radically challenged as I was by these completely extreme points of view, and we'd always have these contentious arguments till like 3 a.m, I was exposed to thoughts and ideas radically outside that which I was even aware of or could comprehend as being true. But by engaging with them, it stretched myself in multiple dimensions to dance with things I would have never danced with or play with moves that I would never have encountered, that contributed to my own growth. I didn't become a communist or an anarchist or a nihilist, but in understanding those perspectives, it enabled me to grow in my understanding. So I wasn't just this narrow, happy path kind of person. I could see that there were other angles, other perspectives, other ideas that had something in them that I had to contend with. And you're right. I think there is something about the current moment which seeks to protect us from things that we don't like or ideas that we don't agree with or people that are not like us. And there's a really interesting book called Fractured. I don't know whether you've come across that, which is an investigation to the degree to which that phenomena is present and the degree to which our social media and our technology allows us to self-sort into the communal groups that reify my own identity and way of thinking. So technology has enabled that process to accelerate by selecting out those that we don't agree with and only putting ourselves in relationship with people who think and act and like us. So what he examines is the degree to which that happens, but also the degree to which it happens across ethnic boundaries, the degree it happens across age boundaries, and that younger people are even less likely to speak to people 10 years or more difference in their age than ever before in known history. So we're compacting and condensing across multiple vectors those that which we hang out and prepare to listen to and engage with, which at a moment which requires multiple perspectives to deal with more complexity is exactly the wrong direction to be going. That we want to protect ourselves from other perspectives and other... but then contending with the complexity of the world becomes a much more fraught enterprise, because the ability to rise above, take multiple perspectives, collective wisdom that affords us an opportunity to see how we can move forward, that takes into account the views of multiple. If we can't get to that place of looking and seeing and synthesizing, because we will refuse to do that or refuse to accept the validity of another perspective, then we get stuck. And I think we see a lot of that around us at the moment. But unlocking that is part of what needs to happen in order for us to make collective progress at scale in a wise way.
So I'm going to play with something. This is going to break the whole thing, and it's fine. It can be reassembled by watching this. But I'm going to say something like this: pathological task avoidance, the thing that prevents us from sharpening our claws. In a sense, it's because so much snow has accumulated on the face of the mountain that there is an avalanche imminent, and claws are going to cause a collapse, and all of the snow runs down the mountain in one huge sweep, destroying everything that we knew was possible without knowing how to do this. That's one image. Another image, it's a stretch of the metaphor, so it's a little bit torturous, but it actually works out okay. There's a way to get down the mountain in a more of a flow. In a way, this avalanche, the energy that's locked up in the avalanche, is a kind of Gordian knot. It's a series of individual resistances that add up to a massive resistance where there's an immense amount of energy in that whole thing, but it can't figure out what to do with itself without just falling. And it's not at all using anything for us. It's doing something to some scale, but it's not doing something at the scale we're doing, or staying on there. That's not going to last either. You can't just do that. Or an interesting little thing of where are the places that possibly looking at an interesting way of creating some warmth that allows some snow to melt and create a pool that warms up a little bit more of the snow and then creates, this is the torture part, create a kind of a siphoning energy to get out of this stream bed or this lake on the mountainside that will fill up with water and create a siphoning tube to allow the water to flow down the stream, exit out of this and flow back down closer to the sea. And something like this coordinated action, if I pay attention to, and the only way for that to work is for each snowflake and each thing doing its territorying and mapping simultaneously to notice how it changes the landscape in such a way that we do something that allows us to behave in a large-scale motion where I, as an individual snowflake, can't climb out of this crevice, but we collectively can find the right new binding and flow and time scale and behavior pattern that does allow a lot of us to do this and melt it and still maintain a sense of cohesion. So
yeah, no, I love that. I love that. I think something of the call for a transcendent story that lifts us out of our stuckness into some collective space where we can join together. So there's something of that, but there's also, as you say, something about shaping the context that makes possible that kind of move.
Yeah. Beautiful. So I call this, rather than a telescoping or a microscoping or a temporal scoping, a holoscoping. It allows for zooming out, zooming in, zooming forward and back, all of these different ways through different lenses, and this way in which we can find patterns between archetypes and scales of archetypes and coordinated action that allows us to see behavior in a way that is difficult to see otherwise.
Another Forrest Landryism, which I think is quite good in the context of what you just said, is he draws the difference between simplicity, complexity, and clarity. So a lot of people go, "Oh, it's complex." And like, well, there's no way we could know what's happening. And we need to simplify things such that we can fit the complexity to the simplicity of what feels doable. But of course, anyone worth their salt would say, well, you can't simplify complexity, or else you're going to make, well, that's going to lead you to make a set of moves that are just going to make the complexity worse, or is going to shift the problem around. Clarity, however, is the ability to distill within the complexity some of the underlying patterns that are at play here. What's the underlying patterns of reality that are manifesting in symptoms as complexity, but to be able to see a little through a little deeper into what's happening to some of the underlying patterns. And of course, when you think about it, like, oh, that makes sense. Like, you could look out the window and think, well, how can anyone know what the weather's going to be? Look at all this complexity. The winds are moving, the clouds are moving. But understanding cyclones and anticyclones and the physics of how things spiral around, and you can look at air pressure, you can start to discern some of the patterns that then give you the ability to forecast what's going on and what otherwise would look like complexity. You can, why do people buy all this shit? Like, they don't need to buy them. Then you get René Girard coming out with his mimetic desires, and then you go, yes, there's a kind of pattern at play that gives us some explanatory power of what's going on. It's not the whole story, but it gives us some clarity into what's happening here. And with that clarity, I've now got some sort of grip or sense of what could be done here. Remaining humble that that's not the whole story, but there is something to work with rather than being confounded by it. So the difference between complexity and chaos is that in complexity, there are some underlying patterns at work. So how do we discern and distill through our multi-perspectival holographic way of looking at things? Is it possible to bring to the surface or illuminate those underlying patterns that then give us some more clarity of what's happening and what could be done?
Yes. Beautiful. So one last thought, just to look at this. What I see as a possibility of using AI, and this is to accentuate the holoscoping nature of it. It isn't to give AI the thing of tell me what I should be doing. This is what scouts are for. But scouts can use it to figure out something, not to give it to it, but if they want to look at the scaling and differently, holoscoping, scaling, doing that. A curator does something different. A pioneer does something different. But it's a something of an adjustable lens that allows us to do kind of this informational. It's too much information. Can I tease out the relevant information that will allow me to see the feature set of what's possible in my close thing that can create a change in the landscape that will afford me to move, inch forward, and share what I'm learning in that moving. Yeah.
And I think that holoscoping through time as well, to history, to now, and holoscoping projecting to the future, enables us not only to discern the patterns, but how the patterns unfold or have unfolded and interact over time, and what might happen in the future. So we need the wisdom to be able to understand what we're discovering in the scouting, to then inform what we ought to do with what we've discovered in ways that lead us to a better tomorrow rather than a worse one.
Yeah, it's tempting to think that the thing that I think we're most afraid of now is the paperclip maximizer version of AI. The possibility that the AI will be an extractor. I think that if this model of the various archetypes is valid, the AI can't possibly be an extractor overall in its fullness, but it may express extractorness under the right conditions, just as humanity does. And if we can look at this at the scale that allows more full looking, then we can also look at what are the other features that AI wants in this patterning of looking at relationships between large scale, small scales of time and space, and interest in intrinsicness.
Which is why it was so interesting that video I forwarded you about. I think it was an article, wasn't it, that was saying in absorbing and distilling most of human knowledge and stories, have large language models internalize the archetypes that are present within that? Is that a natural? So is it operating from a position of archetypal response because that's what it's been trained on, and it sees those patterns?
Yeah.
And as it evolves and develops, what happens if those archetypes are there? What happens to those? Do they evolve, develop? Do they change? Do they become something out of alignment with human? I don't know. These are.
So you mentioned the alignment here, right? And the alignment problem with AI is one of the things. Art of alignment, Roger's stuff is another one of these. And it's an interesting thing of noticing the polarity and the tug of war and the stuckness. How do we unstuck ourselves And this holoscoping can they say this is only one thing. It may be the dominant thing where the alignment feels static. But we can bring in neighbors and scales to look at a possible way of shifting this that allows for it's like there's something that a possible micro misalignment might allow a movement to back our way out of the corner that we've gotten ourselves in to find a new alignment over somewhere else. It's not always continuing through line to the existing tension point.
So an interesting thing to throw in, because I think it's an important ingredient in taking or helping people to go on a journey to think about this, is if or believe that this is a better way of doing things. If holoscoping does give us a better set of frames and a mixture of frames in which to reveal more of reality, and through that enable us to make wiser choices for ourselves and others, there are many people to whom that would feel such a daunting thing. It's beyond my capacity to really grasp and understand what you're talking about. Therefore, are you asking me to trust something I don't understand? And will I view your claim for that as being a better way of doing it with suspicion? Because here you come telling us that I don't know what needs to be done, but you do. And so what is there another story that needs to be wrapped around this, which is the bridge to believe that holoscoping is a better way of doing things? And it feels, I don't have the complete answer to that, but it feels like the shift from the Enlightenment way of thinking to, you know, whether it's meta-modern or whatever you describe it, the idea that the world is divided into bits and things, and the left brain can takes over and sees connections, and if it fits with the left brain understanding, then it seems to work. If it isn't, then it's suspect. This notion that everything is connected to everything else, this interconnectedness of all things, feels like part of the meta story that dissolves the thinginess of the world that the previous Enlightenment have given us, the objectification of everything, that we are in an interconnected world, and therefore ways of thinking in an interconnected ways are the ways that are going to get us out of the problems that we've got into. And therefore, whatever the answer is, it is more the orientation to the holoscoping direction is likely to yield a better way of thinking than I mean, it's not the complete justification, but it feels the justification to get to holoscoping needs to be part of what we're thinking about, as well as the power of the holoscoping itself.
Yes. It's really kind of an astonishing thing to recognize that for each archetype, as I'm playing with it, it seems to have a different place that feels like it's moving the most slow and a place that is moving the most fast. And there's something like having my feet on the ground, my root downward, which is like participatory. My head in the clouds, or my eye is up here to peer around, is the propositional. My hands on either side and the graspability of these things affords a kind of perspectivalness and participatory and proceduralness, right? So these things and the ways of knowing that John Vervaeke talks about expressed differently in each individual, and the ability to look at the scale, right? So this is one of the things that Jonathan Pageau named when he was talking to Brett Weinstein a while back. Scientists often think of faith as belief without evidence, whereas the actual faithful say it's trusting the unseen. And the unseen, in some sense, might be hiding in a time scale that we can't actually observe, but that I feel. So there's a movement through me, that there is a beat coming. I can feel the beat coming. I trust it. I can feel it in me. And others who can feel it respond to that beat. And the co-response, the co-sensing that beat actually brings it into awareness. And that sensing the unseen is not just faith in nothing. It's faith in something that moves at a scale that seeing misses.
Yes. There's also something else, which is, I think, I'm reflecting my work in health is helped to reveal also, which is in getting from where we are to a better place, there may be emergent layers to that conversation that represent a kind of punctuated equilibrium of understanding. It's not just sort of linear, more complexity. There is a kind of arriving at a point where from that vantage point, you suddenly see everything in a new way. It's kind of a moment of collective clarity on the complexity. So, for example, in healthcare, there's lots of talk about, oh, we need to do more integrated care. We need to do more remote management. We need to look at genetic care. We need to look at this, and everyone will talk about these pieces. And they're going, oh, fucking hell, this is so complex. And there's all these competing claims of bits that need to be done better. And I think a lot of the work I've been doing is saying it snaps together when you think about holistic health. Like it's the totality of my health as it unfolds through my life. And it's that story writ large for populations. That's the game of health. People go, yeah. Even people who don't work in healthcare, yeah, that's the thing that we should be doing. There's almost like emergence through the layers of things we could be doing sort of crystallizes into snaps together into a new shared understanding that then gives us a frame of understanding that lifts the whole system to another level that more people can get. Funny enough, people outside health get it more than sometimes people in health because they're still clinging to their siloed piece of that problem and trying to see everything from that point of view rather than taking a step out and seeing it snap together. So there is something of that dynamic if we could call into being that or discover would be helpful.
Well, then it's a beautiful way of noticing that there are two ways to look at that. One is the stuckness is like, I can't move. I was flowing and now I'm stagnant. What's wrong with that? I should be flowing. It's like, no, that's the ratcheting move that allows you to rest for a moment while another part moves into position and ratchets and then allows you to do this. It's a mechanistic view of this, and it's a biological thing, but the mechanistic aspect is just biomimicry. We can't forget.
Yeah. Exactly.
Beautiful. I would say that's a good place to land.
We have many, many amazing conversations, but that's right up there in the top 5. I think.
It's a keeper for sure. Thank you, Andy, so much. Have a wonderful day. Look forward to the next one.
And you too. Take care.
All right, bye.